In the evening sky, red clouds are like blood. In the deserted countryside, two dark horses with wings walked in the air, pulling a car behind them, shuttling through the mountains, whistling wind. On the pedals of the carriage, sat a majestic old man in armor. Although his hair was white, his eyes were like tigers, and he felt very oppressive. Inside the carriage, there is a mother and son. The mother is young and beautiful, wearing a long dress with jewels and a phoenix feather and a golden hairpin, like an empress. With tears all over her face, she hugged her son tightly, trembling slightly. The son in her arms is only 2 years old, with a delicate face and golden clothes, like a porcelain doll. At this moment, the toy-year-old's eyes were dull, and there was fear and unwillingness that did not belong to his age. "I've only been reincarnated for 2 years before I'm going to die again," the toy-year-old roared in despair in his heart. In his previous life, he was from Earth, and he died young before he could enjoy life. Reincarnated in this world like an ancient immortal, he still retains the memory of his previous life. Compared with the previous life, he in this life is a world. My father was the head of the great Zhou dynasty, Emperor Zhou Yan. Zhou Yandi, an immortal existence, controls dozens of dynasties, hundreds of millions of people, and tens of thousands of soldiers, sweeping across the northern wasteland. His mother was a concubine of Emperor Zhou Yan, and her name was Empress Zhao Xian. Until a month ago, Empress Zhaoxuan's father was revealed to be rebelling, which caused Emperor Zhou Yan to be furious. Empress Zhao Xian pleaded with her father, claiming that she had been wronged, but the evidence was overwhelming. 5 days ago, Empress Zhao Xian learned that Empress was planning to poison her, so she sought help from her former sister and concubine, and escaped from the Great Zhou Palace overnight. During this time, Zhou Yandi visited other dynasties, and he would not return without a few months. If Empress Zhao Xian did not escape, she and her son Zhou Suanji would both have to die. Zhou Suanji watched his mother cry so desolately in this life, he felt pain in his heart, raised his little hand, touched Empress Zhaoxuan's face, and said, "Mother, don't cry. The physique of people in this world is far stronger than that of people on earth, and the toy-year-old Zhou Suanji can already speak." In order not to shock the world, Zhou Suanji's words are usually not too long. In the palace, the wood show will be destroyed by the forest wind. Hearing Zhou Suanji's words, Empress Zhao Xian burst into tears. "Niang Niang, there is a big river in front that can flow into the Arakawa River and throw the little prince down, maybe there is a chance of life," the old general outside the carriage suddenly said with a solemn tone. "Drop it." Zhou Suanji's whole body was jolted, the old man is ruthless. When Empress Zhao Xian heard this, she took off a necklace from her neck. The pendant was a wooden bead. This wooden bead is only the size of a thumb and is ordinary. She tied the necklace around Zhou Suanji's neck, kissed his little face, and said, "My child, this wooden bead was born with you, and it is also a symbol of your being the Prince of Great Zhou. If your Majesty investigates the truth in the future, someone will be sent to find you." After speaking, she gently pressed her right hand on Zhou Suanji, and a translucent golden light appeared, wrapping Zhou Suanji in it. She took Zhou Suanji out of the carriage, came to the pedal, and looked down. Below is a canyon, as wide as 100 zhang, and the turbulent river is constantly flowing. If this mortal fell, it would be shattered to pieces. Zhou Suanji looked dizzy for a while. "Sudden death in the last life, will you be smashed to death again in this life?" "I'm sorry, in the next life, if I can still be your mother, I will make it up to you." Empress Zhao Xian said softly, the tears on her face had been wiped away, and her expression was determined. After speaking, she threw Zhou Suanji down. Little Zhou Suanji spun around in the air and looked up at Empress Zhao Xian. Looking at each other, Zhou Suanji's eyes no longer had fear, but a strong reluctance. Empress Zhao Xian was stunned. This is not the look a toy-year-old should have. She reached out her hand subconsciously, wanting to catch Zhou Suanji. Plop! Zhou Suanji, who was wrapped in golden light, fell into the rapids of the river, disappeared, and his life and death were unknown. Empress Zhao Xian abruptly shrank her hands and covered her chest, tears could not stop pouring out of her eyes. She hates it. Hate yourself for not fighting. If she could climb up with the help of Emperor Zhou Yan's favor, perhaps there would be no disaster today. Niang Niang, don't worry, when the little prince was born, auspiciousness descended from the sky, unicorns came from the sky, hovering above the palace. Even the celestial master said that the little prince had an extraordinary life, and his life should not die, you can rest assured. The old general said with relief, his voice just finished. Hey! There was a sound of breaking through the air, a sharp arrow pierced the old general's forehead, blood spattered, and the two flying black horses neighed, turned, and ran away. Lady Zhao Xian was almost thrown off, and quickly grabbed the reins. In the river, Zhou Suanji was wrapped in a golden mask, unscathed. Looking at some dead wood and mud and rocks galloping past, he felt very sad. Although Empress Zhao Xian had only raised him for 2 years, and most of the time she was taken care of by a palace maid, she was her biological mother after all. He sighed faintly and said, if I have the ability in the future, I will help you to avenge. How difficult is it to seek revenge from the queen of the great Zhou dynasty? This world is like a mythical world, where cultivation is the mainstream, the strong are respected, and all the imperial guards have the ability to split mountains and rivers. When he was only 2 years old, he had never been exposed to the method of cultivating immortals. How could he take revenge? At this moment, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest, and when he looked down, the necklace that Empress Zhao Xian had given him had disappeared, and a red mark appeared on his tender little chest. Ding! The Supreme Excalibur system is activated. Ding! The Supreme Excalibur system has successfully integrated the soul of the Sword Master. Ding! Start the random lottery for the new Sword Master. Ding! Congratulations to the Sword Master for winning the Silver Red Dragon Sword and White Crane Sword technique. 4 consecutive voices resembling electronic sounds sounded in Zhou Suanji's mind, shocking him into a fascination. Before he could react, he only felt his mind explode and instantly fell into a faint. Blue sky and white clouds, green mountains and green waters. Between the mountains, the river runs crisscross. Beside a river, there is a little girl with a ponytail washing clothes by the river. She is wearing a patchwork cloth. The little girl has fair skin and a beautiful and lovely face. She looks only 6 or 7 years old, and her washboard is bigger than hers. She rolled up her sleeves and wiped the water from her cheeks with the back of her hand. At this moment, a golden ball of light floated from the upper stream, attracting the little girl's attention. She was stunned for a while, put down the clothes in her hand, and walked over cautiously. The golden ball of light soon leaned against the bank of the river. She approached and saw that there was actually a young child inside, only about 2 years old, a small child with clenched fists, who was sleeping soundly. The golden light suddenly dissipated, and the 2-year-old child sank into the river. She was so frightened that she ran over and picked him up. Even though he was submerged in water and held by her, the 2-year-old child still slept soundly and giggled. I don't know how long ago. Zhou Suanji's consciousness slowly recovered, he opened his eyes, and his memory poured out like a flood, giving him a splitting headache. He propped up his small body and found himself sitting on a wooden bed with clothes piled up beside the bed. This is a small wooden house, which can only accommodate a wooden bed and a wooden table. On the wooden table, there is a kettle and 2 porcelain bowls with broken corners. Other than that, there is nothing else. Outside the door is surrounded by green trees, and the mountains and forests in the distance can be vaguely seen. Zhou Suanji shook his head and asked in his heart, the Supreme Divine Sword System. He still remembered what happened before he fell into a coma. Could it be the golden finger that God gave him? In his previous life, he had read a lot of novels, and he naturally understood the system. It's like playing a single-player game. At the same time, He felt that the words Supreme Divine Sword were somewhat familiar. I seem to have heard it somewhere. Sword Master, what are your orders? An electronic sound rang in his mind. What is the origin of the Supreme Excalibur system? What functions does it have? Zhou Suanji continued to ask in his heart, the look of anticipation on his face could not be suppressed. The Supreme Excalibur system is a chance. When Hongmeng first opened, there were 3,000 rules. These 3,000 rules later became the Great Way. Beyond the 3,000 rules, there was a variable, also called chance. Hongmeng opportunity is attached to the main body of the sword, simulating the Supreme Excalibur program created by the Sword Master's previous life. You can call me Sword Spirit. I don't have an independent consciousness, it's just an auxiliary program created by you to concentrate on cultivating Sword Masters. The electronic voice replied, hearing Zhou Suanji's face bewildered. I wipe. I see. When he came back to his senses, Zhou Suanji suddenly became excited. In his previous life, he was a programmer. When playing a certain Xiangxia standalone game, he felt that it was too difficult to upgrade to become stronger, so he developed the Supreme Excalibur program. It is the Golden Finger program. All the swords in the game can be drawn randomly, because he is playing swordsman. Not only that, any sword technique, as long as it is repeated according to the sword move, can reach the full level without comprehension or special materials. Now that the Supreme Excalibur program has come true and has become a system, doesn't it mean that he is going to fly? At this moment, lines of words that only he could see appeared in front of him. Sword Master, Zhou Suanji race, Great Zhou Imperial Vein Cultivation, not entering the stream skill, none swordsmanship, none divine ability, none sword, Silver Red Dragon Sword. Is this my property? And many more. What is the silver in front of the Red Dragon Sword? Zhou Suanji narrowed his eyes, secretly suspicious. Although the Supreme Excalibur system is based on your Supreme Excalibur program, there are countless divine swords that have been independently derived and created, and they are divided into grades. The grades that can be announced to the Sword Master temporarily include ordinary stone, black iron, bronze, silver, gold, amethyst, jinyao, and higher ranks cannot be announced for the time being, because the Sword Master is too weak. Jianling explained, and Zhou Suanji swallowed. Sounds great. What kind of magic weapon is the silver-level Red Dragon Sword equivalent to? And many more. Where's my Red Dragon Sword? Just as Zhou Suanji thought about it, a sword appeared in front of him, floating on the bed. It is the Red Dragon Sword. The long sword is 4 feet long, which is equivalent to about 1 meter, 3 or 4 meters. As soon as this sword came out, Zhou Suanji's eyes lit up, he was so handsome. Lines of text that only he could see appeared before his eyes. Sword name, Red Dragon Sword grade, silver description. The silver sword contains the soul of a red dragon. If it is stimulated, its power will increase dramatically. He couldn't remember whether there was a red dragon sword in the Supreme Excalibur program in his previous life. After all, the game data was huge. He found that the red dragon sword was like one of his arms, like an arm, and when his mind moved, the red dragon sword flew wherever he went. It was really amazing. How to hide it? Zhou Suanji murmured, a 2-year-old couldn't keep such a sword at all. As soon as the voice fell, the red dragon sword disappeared. The system has a supreme library, which can store all kinds of materials. Except for living things, it is like a storage bag, which has an independent space. Jianling replied, making Zhou Suanji sigh, how convenient. Do you inherit the White Crane swordsmanship? Certainly. Zhou Suanji replied without hesitation, in order to take revenge, he must become stronger. As the prince of the Great Zhou dynasty, Zhou Suanji had also heard about the cultivation realm. From low to high, they are nourishing qi, foundation building, consecration, inner alchemy, spiritual spring, yuanying, exiting the body, refining the spirit, and Mahayana. Each realm is divided into 10 layers. His father, Joyandi, existed in the Mahayana realm, and his lifespan was continuous, almost immortal. The continent he was in was called the Northern Wilderness Territory, where there were many sect dynasties, and above the dynasties there were dynasties, and there were 7 dynasties in the current Eastern Territory human race. Without the Supreme Excalibur system, unless Josuenji had great luck, it would be very difficult for him to threaten Joyandi, let alone get in touch with Joyandi. The Lord of the Dynasty is not something you can see if you want to, just like a land fairy, mortals can only look up. Immediately afterwards, a memory came into his mind, and he couldn't help closing his eyes. I saw a figure in my mind dancing a sword, like a white crane, agile and elegant. It took him a while to sort out this memory. The white crane swordsmanship is divided into 3 styles. The first style, Behi stands on the ground. The second form, the white crane spreads its wings. The third form, the white crane fairy trail. Every sword move was in his mind. In this world, the swordsman has a very high status, because the sword is the king of 100 soldiers. However, Kendo is difficult to cultivate, and every kind of swordsmanship requires great comprehension. The same swordsmanship, Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com. The power displayed by swordsmen with different comprehension is also different. But Josuenji has the Supreme Excalibur system. When he designed the Supreme Excalibur program, he also opened a shortcut for swordsmanship. He only needs to practice the sword moves 10 times in accordance with the white crane sword art, and he can learn the first style. The second style needs to be practiced 50 times, and the third style needs to be practiced 100 times. One day is enough. Josuenji thought happily, but when he thought of Empress Zhaoxian, his mood dropped again. I don't know if Empress Zhaoxian is dead or alive. Even if she is alive, the world is huge, where will he find it? My grandma's not here, you can come next time. A childish voice of a girl came from outside the wooden house, making Josuenji tremble with fright, and the personal attributes in front of him also disappeared. Could it be that your grandma escaped the debt? Tell her that within 3 months, the debt must be repaid, did you hear? If you don't pay the debt, I'll sell you to the kill in the town. A sharp female voice came, and Josuenji could already think of her bitter and ugly old face. He hurriedly lay down. He was also curious and grateful for who saved him. If he stayed in the wilderness and was eaten by monsters, it would be very sad. In addition to the human race in the eastern region, the demon race has a larger sphere of influence, and the traces of the monster beasts have penetrated into all parts of the human race. After a while, a little girl came in. She lowered her head, rubbed her eyes, and kept choking up. It was obvious that she had been scared to cry just now. She didn't go to see Josuenji, but sat on the bench, lying on the table and crying. Josuenji, who was pretending to be asleep, felt distressed for a while, so he turned over, lay on his side, looked at her, and called out, "Sister, I'm thirsty." When the little girl heard Josuenji's voice, she couldn't help looking up at him. Josuenji was born in the royal family, with fair skin and delicate facial features. At the age of 2, he was able to please most people. In the palace, he often pretended to be pitiful, which attracted the concubines of the harem to love him immensely. Of course, except for the empress, the lady made no secret of her disgust when she saw him. The little girl stopped crying as soon as she saw his face. "Are you awake?" she exclaimed in surprise, forgetting her grievance, and hurriedly poured water for Josuenji. When she came to the wooden bed, she held a bowl in her left hand, and held Josuenji in her right hand to feed him water. Josuenji drank it all in one gulp, and his mouth was full of water stains. He giggled and said, "Sister is so nice." The little girl giggled and asked, "What's your name?" "My name is Josuenji, I'm 2 years old this year, sister, how about you?" Zhou Suanji laughed. Facing a little girl, he wouldn't worry that he would cause the other party's doubts. Zhou Suanji? What a strange name. My name is Zhang Shui, and I am 6 years old. The little girl mumbled with her fingers crossed. Zhou Suanji sat on her lap, raised his neck and asked, "Did you save me?" "Yes, where are your parents? Did they not want you?" Little Zhang Shui nodded and asked. Zhou Suanji replied, "They were eaten by monsters. Empress Zhao Xian is afraid that there will be more luck than good luck." As for Zhou Yandi, Zhou Suanji has already thought that he is dead. Knowing that Zhou Suanji's parents were eaten by monsters, although little Jiangxiu sympathized, she was not surprised. It is not uncommon for her to be eaten by monsters when people go out hunting in the village from time to time. The two little kids started to communicate. Zhou Suanji learned that the village was called Qinghe Village, which was located in a corner of the Nanhan dynasty. The Nanhan dynasty was one of the subordinate dynasties of the Great Zhou dynasty. Little Zhang Shui has never seen her parents since she was a child, and lives with her grandmother in her 60s. No one knew her grandmother's name, so the village called her Crazy Old Lady. Since she was 5 years old, the crazy old lady has often gone out, leaving her at home alone. She was frightened at first, but then she got used to it. It must be said that the children of this world mature earlier than the earth. It is worth mentioning that the crazy old lady will ask someone to borrow money from time to time. As for what she does, no one knows. She owes an ass, and someone came to ask for it just now. He even claimed to sell her to a kill. "Sister, I will protect you from now on." Zhou Suanji opened his mouth and said, after all, little Zhang Shui had saved his life. Xiao Zhang Shui hugged Zhou Suanji, smiled, but did not answer, but muttered, "Grandma has been away for half a month, will she not want me anymore?" Zhou Suanji felt distressed for a while, patted his little chest, and said with a smile, "Your grandma is gone, I'm here, isn't that the will of God? I can accompany you. Anyway, he has nowhere to go. If he goes to the city, he might be caught, so he might as well stay in a small mountain village." When little Zhang Shui heard this, she immediately grinned, pinched Zhou Suanji's small face, and said with a smile, "Okay, you will be my brother from now on." When she was young, she was not prepared for Zhou Suanji, after all Zhou Suanji was so young. "Elder sister!" Zhou Suanji exclaimed sweetly, seeing the savior so happy, he didn't feel tired either. "What a cute little girl!" At this moment, Zhou Suanji's stomach suddenly growled. "Sister, I'm a little hungry." Zhou Suanji said with a bitter face. When little Zhang Shui heard it, she covered her mouth and smiled and said, "Sister will cook porridge for you." After speaking, she let go of Zhou Suanji, got out of bed and left. Zhou Suanji got out of bed with him. He wanted to test the power of the red dragon sword. When he came to the yard, he glanced around. The yard was not big. There was a yellow dog and a group of chickens. There were 3 wooden houses in total, one for living, one for kitchen, and one for latrines. After seeing Xiao Jiangxiu walk into the kitchen, he quietly went around to the back of the wooden house. Behind the wooden house is a hill, surrounded by woods, and there is no one. Zhou Suanji's mind moved, and the red dragon sword appeared in his hand. The seemingly large long sword was in his hand, but it didn't give him the slightest sense of weight, it was as light as a feather. He slashed towards the mountain wall in front of him. The long sword slashed into the mountain with ease, making him feel like he was slashing tofu. Zhou Suanji was ecstatic. Such sharpness! It's not an exaggeration to cut iron like mud. You must know that he is only 2 years old, and his strength is pitiful. After thinking about it, he retracted his sword and turned to leave. When he came to the yard, he hesitated for a moment, then walked to the kitchen. He wants to see how the 6-year-old girl cooks porridge. Will she burn the kitchen? Stepping over the threshold of the kitchen, he looked inside and saw Xiao Jiangxiu standing on a bench in front of the stove, holding an iron spoon that was completely out of proportion to her size. Judging from her appearance, it was obvious that she was already skilled in cooking, which made people feel distressed. She seemed to feel that someone was looking at her. Xiao Jiangxiu turned her head, and when she saw Zhou Suanji standing at the door, she was stunned. Then she put her left hand on her waist, looking like a little adult, and scolded, "Little brother Suanji, hurry up. Go back to bed and rest, and the porridge will be ready soon." Zhou Suanji laughed and said, "Sister, let me set fire to you." While speaking, he walked towards the stove. "Don't. While you go, don't burn the house." Little Zhang Shui quickly stopped her. She put down the iron spoon and jumped off the bench to stop Zhou Suanji. Zhou Suanji said, "Sister, don't worry, I've set fire to it." "Will I believe it? You are only 2 years old, and I was still drooling when I was 2. Little Zhang Shui hummed with her hands on her hips. Zhou Suanji said helplessly, "But you're only 6 years old. Cooking at the age of 6 is also very worrying. You also know that I'm 6? I'm not a 3-year-old, but you're not as good as a 3-year-old. Little Jiangxiu still did not give in. Her words made Zhou Suanji wonder whether to laugh or cry. This girl has really entered the state of an older sister. The more sensible you are, the less hurt you will be. Zhou Suanji sighed faintly, turned around and walked to the door, sat on the small bench, and said obediently, "Then I will accompany my sister." Seeing that Zhou Suanji was so cute, little Zhang Shui couldn't help but walk over, rubbed his little face, and giggled, "Good, my sister will be ready soon." After kneading a few times, she returned to the stove with satisfaction. Zhou Suanji just looked at her like this, but thought of Empress Zhao Xian again. He must find Empress Zhao Xian. Live to see people, die to see corpses. Not only that, but he also has to pay the price for Queen de Zhou. Thinking of this, fighting spirit burned in his eyes. By the way, sword spirit, how can I get more divine swords and exercises? Zhou Suanji asked in his heart that the white crane swordsmanship is just a swordsmanship, and he has not yet practiced the exercises. If one develops spiritual power, the power of the white crane swordsmanship will leap forward. Every year when the sword master is 1 year older, he can get a chance to draw a lottery, which must contain a divine sword. At the same time, he can randomly select exercises, divine swords, swordsmanship, magical powers, medicine pills, etc. In addition, whenever the sword master breaks through a big when you reach the realm, you will also get a chance to draw a lottery, but there is no setting that must contain the divine sword. Sword Spirit replied. 1 year, 1 divine sword? So casual. Sword Master, isn't this your creative idea? A 60-year-old girl who lives alone and cooks for herself is pitiful. If Zhou Suanji had no memory of his previous life, if he was little Zhang Shui, he would have to be scared to death instead of starving to death. Thinking of this, while Zhou Suanji felt sorry for her, he also admired her. This woman will definitely be the phoenix among people in the future. When little Zhang Shui finished cooking the porridge, she fed Zhou Suanji herself, and let it cool before feeding. I have to say that Xiao Jiangxiu's cooking skills are not bad, but Zhou Suanji, who is used to eating palace feasts, actually thinks it is not bad. Maybe it's because I'm too hungry. After all, how superb can a 60-year-old be at cooking? After he finished eating a bowl of porridge, he saw that it was still early, so he practiced swordsmanship in the yard. He picked up a wooden branch and used it as a sword. After all, the red dragon sword has an extraordinary origin, and it cannot be easily exposed. He believed in Xiao Jiangxiu, but he was also afraid that villagers passing by would see him. He first practiced the sword moves according to the first style of the white crane sword technique. Only after practicing did you realize how difficult these movements were. He is only a 2-year-old child. It took a stick of incense to complete the first practice. Little Zhang Shui came out of the kitchen, and when she saw Zhou Suanji's movements, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "Brother, what are you doing?" "Practicing swords. A 2-year-old can practice swordsmanship? Anyway, she never saw it." "Well, after practicing, you can protect my sister." Zhou Suanji replied casually, a sentence that made little Zhang Shui happy. She said, "Then slow down and don't hurt yourself." After she finished speaking, she got up and went back to the house, preparing to prepare some clothes for Zhou Suanji. Zhou Suanji continued to practice swordsmanship. When he practiced the first style of the white crane swordsmanship 5 times, he found that his body became lighter and even had a sense of strength, which was really amazing. When he finished practicing 10 times, he felt that his physical fitness had doubled, and he seemed to have enlightenment in the dark. Once again, he cast Beihe's foothold, very relaxed, like an old swordsman who has practiced swords for more than 10 years, and the speed of swords is extremely fast. He continued to practice the second style of white crane spreading its wings. It was only until dusk that he successfully completed 50 repetitions. He was already exhausted. When the 50 repetitions were completed, the fatigue on his body disappeared immediately. He waved his fist, feeling full of power. Every time the sword master trains a sword technique, the sword spirit will help enhance the physical quality of the sword master, allowing the sword master to easily perform this sword technique. Now the power of the sword master has reached the power of an adult man. Sword spirit followed, and Zhou Suanji was overjoyed to hear it. At the age of 2, he is comparable to an adult man. "I want to become a Neza." With the Supreme Excalibur system, he doesn't have to worry about whether he will lose his training. Instead of continuing to practice, he went to the kitchen to help Xiao Jiangxiu cook. After dinner, Zhou Suanji continued to practice the third style of the white crane swordsmanship, the white crane fairy trail. Little Zhang Shui sat on a small bench not far away and looked at him quietly. She had a silly smile on her face, and Zhou Suanji's appearance made her no longer afraid of the night. Today is definitely the happiest day she has ever had. Zhou Suanji did not notice her expression, but concentrated on practicing the sword. Until late at night, he had practiced the white crane fairy track 100 times. When the last movement of the 100th time was completed, he felt a strange force flowing in his body. He felt his physique strengthened again, and his strength was twice as strong as before. The power of 2. Zhou Suanji was not surprised, he was in the middle of an epiphany. He closed his eyes, held a wooden branch in his right hand, and used the wood as a sword. His body swayed, like a white crane, floating and agile. With one step, he stepped a few meters away and slashed the wood towards a big tree in the courtyard. Click! The wooden branch was broken, but it split the trunk with a 10 cm deep break. Zhou Suanji opened his eyes and raised his eyebrows. Without spiritual power, can he achieve such destructive power even with the white crane sword technique? He looked down at the wooden branch with only half left, thoughtfully. When he cast the white crane fairy just now, he felt that he and the wooden branch became one, and his whole body seemed to be entangled by something. Very comfortable. Is it? Zhou Suanji widened his eyes, his expression stunned. That's right, you have already realized the white crane sword intent. Thousands of sword techniques in the world all have their own sword intent. When you become an adult, even if you don't have spiritual power, you can split a hill with sword intent. Jianling suddenly said, making Zhou Suanji a little dazed. This has become a sword intent? According to his understanding, there are not many swordsmen in this world who can develop sword intent. The most important thing is that he is only 2 years old. The Supreme Excalibur system really defies the sky. As expected of the design I created after staying up late. No, the sword master himself also has a strong talent for kendo, otherwise Hongmeng Chance will not be transformed into the Supreme Excalibur system. The most suitable way for you to practice is kendo. Jianling continued to explain, and Zhou Suanji was stunned. He instantly thought of his father, Emperor Zhou Yan. Zhou Yandi's achievements in swordsmanship are unparalleled. He once killed millions of troops with one sword and shook the world. Sure enough, the dragon gives birth to the dragon and the phoenix gives birth to the phoenix. After thinking about it, he shook his head and turned around. I saw that Xiao Jiangxiu had fallen asleep leaning against the door. Under the moonlight, her little face looked very peaceful. Silly girl! Zhou Suanji said softly, then walked to the door, picked up little Zhang Shui, and walked into the house. With the strength of the two, he picked up the 6-year-old girl, which was naturally easy. After practicing sword for a day, Zhou Suanji was also tired and fell asleep on the bed. Little Jiangxiu seemed to be tired, so she turned over to hold him down. If it wasn't for his physical strength, he would have to be crushed unconscious by her. After all, he was only 2 years old. Early the next morning, Zhou Suanji changed into Xiao Jiangxiu's clothes. After all, his golden clothes were easy to attract people's attention. Little Jiangxiu led him around the village, letting the villagers know him. Qinghe village only has more than 20 households, and there are 23 strong men. Usually, 5 or 6 people stay in the village to guard against attacks by monsters or bandits. He was wearing little Jiangxiu's clothes, and he almost tripped when he walked. He looked very cute, and the villagers quickly fell in love with him. Xiao Jiangxiu told his origins again, which made the villagers sympathize with him even more. The villagers of Qinghe are simple and hospitable, and Zhou Suanji's arrival was not rejected in any way. Within 7 days, everyone in the village had seen Zhou Suanji. Although Zhou Suanji has practiced the white crane swordsmanship to its peak, he spends time exercising every day, and spends most of his time playing with little Zhang Shui in the mountains and fields. There are very few monsters in this area. For hundreds of years, almost all the monsters in this area have been arrested and killed. Occasionally, monsters broke in by mistake, but most of the time they are safe. A blink of an eye. 3 months passed. On this day, an uninvited guest arrives. A middle-aged woman with a pock-marked face brought 2 strong men to the yard. The woman was chubby, and her face alone made people feel mean. She put her left hand on her hip and fanned her right hand, shouting at a high voice, "Little one! Girl! Your grandma hasn't come back yet, just come with me and pay the debt for your grandma." Around the courtyard were more than 20 villagers, men and women, all of whom came to support Xiao Jiangxiu. After all, they all belonged to the same village, so little Zhang Shui could not be bullied. It's inhumane, Zhang Shui is only 6 years old. That's right, what's the point of bullying children? If you have the ability, go to the crazy old lady. Is it okay to settle accounts with the children? The villagers protested, but no one dared to drive the middle-aged woman out. Because this woman's name is Shenhua, she is a collateral child of a powerful party in a nearby town, and to offend her is to offend the family. Shenhua got angry when she heard it, and turned around and roared, "It's only right and proper to pay off debts. Anyone who doesn't agree will go to our Fang family to seek justice." Fang's house. The cultivation family of Sichuan town controls all the casinos and brothels in Sichuan town, and even the mayor dare not offend them. At least 30 villages like Qinghe village are dominated by Sichuan town. If they offend Sichuan town, the Fang family can cut off Qinghe village from the outside world and make it impossible to trade. Even though Shenhua is only a side child of the Fang family and doesn't have that much right to speak, the Fang family's deterrent power is too great. The 2 strong men standing behind Shenhua are both cultivators. Although they are just entering the realm of nourishing energy for the first time, they are also stronger than ordinary warriors. They gave a great sense of oppression just standing there. At this moment, little Zhang Shui came out of the house. She looked frightened. Although she didn't know what a kill was, the women in the village said that it was a devil's den, and that if you went there, you couldn't come back. In order to prevent Zhou Suanji from being implicated, she warned several times that Zhou Suanji was not allowed to come out. "My grandma will be back in a while. She won't leave me. You guys. Little Jiangxiu said cautiously, like a frightened rabbit. But before she could finish her sentence, Shenhua interrupted her arrogantly, cursing, "I've already given you 3 months. Do you really think I'm the savior Bodhisattva? Take her away." "Yes." A strong man behind her stepped towards little Jiangxiu. What little Jiang Shui was so frightened that she retreated subconsciously and almost fell to the ground. After all, she was only 6 years old. But just when she was about to fall, a small body hugged her. It was Zhou Suanji. Zhou Suanji straightened her, then pulled her behind him, stared at Shenhua and scolded, "Fat woman! It's really from your heart, no wonder you are so ugly, your heart is so vicious." As soon as these words came out, the strong man who came over was also stunned and stopped. Shenhua's face changed drastically, and the villagers were also stunned. "Is this what a 2-year-old said? Kill him to death for me!" Shenhua shouted, her whole body trembling with anger. Hearing this, the strong man immediately walked towards Zhou Suanji. Zhou Suanji smiled disdainfully, and the red dragon sword appeared in front of him out of thin air, the tip of the sword pointing straight ahead. "Hey!" Poof! The strong man's chest was directly pierced by the red dragon sword, and the red dragon sword followed through Shenhua's chest. 1 sword, 2 lives. The remaining strong man was so frightened that he quickly turned around and ran away. Wow! The villagers all backed away in fright, all with ghostly expressions on their faces. Zhou Suanji's mind moved, and the red dragon sword flew quickly, beheading the strong man who escaped. Having lived for 2 generations, and was chased and killed by the Empress, Zhou Suanji understands the truth of cutting grass and rooting. Although he has no spiritual power, the Along sword has been integrated with him, and he can fight wherever he wants. The speed of the silver level divine sword is definitely not something that the minions who are just entering the key nourishing realm can resist. When Xiao Jiangxiu saw a dead person for the first time, she covered her eyes in fright. Zhou Suanji took a deep breath and said to the villagers, "Everyone, if you don't want Qinghe village to be implicated, you should understand that this matter cannot be spread." The villagers looked at him in horror and backed away, but no one answered. "Demon! Absolutely a monster! Dare to kill at just 2 years old, it is different from the cute children they see on weekdays. And that sword, definitely a demon sword, a demon sword." Zhou Suanji shook his head when he saw their expressions. He walked towards the 3 corpses on the ground and groped for a while on them. In the end, he took out 3 purses and put them directly into the supreme treasury. Next, he definitely can't stay in Qinghe village anymore. "If you have money, you can travel the world. Can you help me deal with it?" Zhou Suanji asked. When the villagers heard this, they were so frightened that they ran away. He sighed, the red dragon sword flew in front of him and disappeared, then he turned around and walked towards Xiao Jiangxiu. Little Jiang Shui opened her fingers with both hands and looked through the gaps between her fingers. When she saw Zhou Suanji walking towards her, she cried and hugged Zhou Suanji with a wow. Zhou Suanji patted her back and comforted, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid, I'm here. I thought that seeing him kill Xiao Jiangxiu would stay away from him, but I didn't expect the opposite." This moved him a little. She really regarded him as her younger brother in her heart. After a while of comfort, little Jiang Shui calmed down. She asked nervously, "Brother, if you kill them, the officers and soldiers will come to arrest you." "Officers and soldiers?" Zhou Suanji snorted and laughed. Although the great Zhou dynasty controlled dozens of dynasties, the dynasty controlled many cities, and there were countless villages and towns under the cities, but the pressure of the officers and soldiers was not that high. Especially on the fringes. After all, this world is a world of cultivation, and the strong are respected. As long as you are strong enough, no matter how much you do, there will be countless forces to win over you. Compared with the earth, this world is undoubtedly much crueler. Zhou Suanji asked earnestly, "We have to run away, will you follow me?" For him, the most important task at the moment is to survive, and as he grows older, he is bound to become stronger. Yu Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. When he is strong enough, he can go to a place where there are many people. We run away? But if grandma comes back? Little Zhang Shui was hesitant. Although the crazy old lady was not responsible for her, she was her only relative. No, now she has another relative. Zhou Suanji said, "Sister, if we don't leave and we are caught, won't it cause trouble for your grandma? If something happens to you, she will be very sad." He smiled on the surface, but in his heart he scolded the crazy old lady. Originally, he could enjoy a happy childhood in Qinghe village, but it was because of the crazy old lady's bad debts that he brought up these things. Thinking of the murmurings that little Zhang Shui slept, he was even more unhappy. This old woman is as abominable as Emperor Zhou Yan. Little Zhang Shui thought for a while, then nodded and said, "Wait for me, I'll clean up." After speaking, she deliberately did not look at the three corpses, and turned back to the wooden house. "Sword Spirit, can I put the whole house into the supreme vault?" Zhou Suanji stared at the wooden house where they lived and asked. Having lived here for 3 months, he also developed feelings for this house. Next, he plans to hide in the mountains for a few years. It would be even better if he had a room. "Can." Sword Spirit replied, making Zhou Suanji brow with joy. "Sister! Don't clean up! Come out!" Zhou Suanji shouted. Hearing this, little Zhang Shui, who had just entered the room, came out again. She asked suspiciously, "What? Don't you escape?" Zhou Suanji took her little hand, and then ordered in his heart, "Jianling, close the house." In front of Xiao Jiangxiu's eyes, the wooden house disappeared out of thin air, making her tremble all over. "Don't be nervous, I know magic, it was taken by me." After taking away the wooden house they lived in, Zhou Suanji went to the kitchen to take away the pots, pans and food. During the whole process, little Zhang Shui looked very excited. For her brother's ability to spell, she finds it extremely magical and exciting. The legend of immortal cultivators is also circulated in Qinghe village. It turns out that her younger brother is also an immortal cultivator. No wonder she looks so cute, completely different from other children in the village, like a lotus in the quagmire. After cleaning up for a while, the two walked around the corpse and walked towards the back mountain. Qinghe village is located halfway up the mountain, surrounded by green mountains and green waters, and there are no other villages within a radius of 50 miles. However, the direction Zhou Suanji went was away from the village and town. He could stay with the red dragon sword, not afraid of the Fang family, but he was worried about making things worse. He knew how terrifying the generals of the great Zhou dynasty were, and it was no problem to overturn mountains and seas. If it was discovered by Queen de Zhou's minions, it would be bad. After finally surviving the disaster, he didn't want to capsize because of carelessness. When he grows up, do not give him 10 years, he might be able to rise, at least he has the power to protect himself. After entering the forest, Zhou Suanji took out the red dragon sword to avoid danger. Holding the sword in the right hand and Xiao Jiangxiu in the left, the two little figures strolled towards the deep mountain. Little Zhang Shui grew up so big and had never left the area of Qinghe village, so she seemed very nervous. Fortunately, Zhou Suanji kept comforting her. For the next 3 days, they were on their way. He took turns sleeping under the tree at night, and hurried on the road during the day. In order to prevent accidents, Zhou Suanji asked the sword spirit to keep an eye on him. Although I encountered some jackals, tigers, and leopards along the way, they were not a threat. Not to mention that he has the red dragon sword in his hand. Zhou Suanji is a swordsman who understands the meaning of the sword, even though he is only 2 years old. After 3 days of rushing, let them completely stay away from Qinghe village. On this day, they came to the cliff, and the river next to it flew down the cliff with great momentum. Standing on the edge of the cliff, they looked into the distance with dull expressions. The cliff is a forest, and 1,000 meters ahead is a mountain range that traverses the earth. At this moment, there are two figures intertwined in the sky above the woods. An old man in a blue robe and a young man in black. They flew in the sky, as if they were not affected by gravity, fighting in the air non-stop. The blue-robed old man with crane hair has a boyish face, holding a long sword in his hand, like a master of immortality. The black-clothed youth has messy long hair, a ferocious face, and is surrounded by black energy. He holds two machetes in his hands, like a demon. From a distance, it looks like a battle between good and evil, with various spells falling one after another, blasting the woods into dust. Cultivator. Zhou Suanji's heart suddenly twitched, and Xiao Jiangxu was also frightened. Practitioners who can fly in the sky are at least in the inner core realm. Zhou Suanji didn't even step into the Qi Yang realm. Even if he had the red dragon sword, he wouldn't necessarily be able to defeat the consecrated light realm cultivator, let alone the higher inner core realm. Without thinking too much, he pulled Xiao Jiangxu around and trotted away. The two children were speechless all the way, and soon disappeared into the woods. After running for an hour, they stopped to rest. For the young ones, it felt like their legs were about to break. "Sister, are you okay?" Zhou Suanji asked while panting. Along the way, no matter how hard or tired Xiao Jiangxu was, she never cried or complained. Many times Zhou Suanji didn't stop, and this girl might faint. "You're all right, of course I'm fine." Little Zhang Shui wiped her sweat and answered panting. Zhou Suanji felt distressed, took out the water bottle from the supreme vault and handed it to her. Although he called her sister, in his heart, little Zhang Shui was like a sister. The two rested on the spot, speaking in a very low voice, for fear of being discovered by the two monks. Probably had a tea break. The two got up, Zhou Suanji put the red dragon sword in the supreme library, and then they supported each other and walked forward, staggering. Walked for a while. Boom! In front of him, a figure fell from the sky and smashed to the ground. Countless leaves fluttered, shaking the surrounding trees. Zhou Suanji and Xiao Jiangxu were both startled, they looked at it intently, and they were instantly horrified. It was the old man in blue robe from before. He was lying in the grass covered in blood, his face full of pain. Seeing him, Zhou Suanji and Xiao Jiangxu were so frightened that they stiffened. The worst has happened yet. Maid, bad luck. Zhou Suanji couldn't help but feel rude in his heart, and hurriedly pulled little Zhang Shui to turn around. As soon as he turned around, he saw a man in black coming with two blood-stained machetes. "Zhou Bailey, it seems that you haven't made much progress in the past 10 years. The man in black sneered and walked towards the blue-robed old man. Zhou Suanji's cold hair stood on end, he pulled little Zhang Shui behind him, and stepped back cautiously. The man in black walked past him, less than 2 meters apart. "What's the matter, why are my legs not obeying, I can't run?" Zhou Suanji thought in horror that he had never faced such a state before. "It's murderous. The other party wants to kill you, so he locks you with murderous auras so that you can't escape." Sword Spirit said in his mind, and Zhou Suanji clenched his left fist. The other party actually wanted to kill them. They are still children. "Zhou Bailey, do you have any last wishes?" The black-clothed man smiled grimly, his eyes full of jokes. As for Zhou Suanji and little Zhang Shui, he had already ignored them. The two little brats, Yuyu-Kanshu www.yuyuganshu.com waited for him to kill Zhou Bailey before disposing of them. Zhou Bailey wanted to stand up, but his bones were broken and he couldn't stand up at all. "They are innocent, let them go." Zhou Bailey gritted his teeth and said that he had given up, but he couldn't bear the harm of the two children to Chiu. "Ha ha ha! You should take care of it first," the man in black said with a sneering smile. As soon as he finished speaking, the long sword suddenly blew his head and blood splattered on the ground. Inner alchemy cultivator, died. Chu Bailey's eyes widened with a ghostly expression on his face. Little Zhang Shui was also frightened by this terrifying scene. The red dragon sword flew into his hands. Sword spirit, is he dead? Zhou Suanji asked in his heart that a cultivator in the inner core might not die so easily. The vitality is cut off, and the death can't be dead again. After receiving the answer from Sword Spirit, Zhou Suanji immediately ran over and groped for a while on the man in black. Finally, I found a storage bag and a storage ring. He turned around and left, pulling little Zhang Shui to escape. And many more. Chu Bailey hurriedly shouted, but Zhou Suanji didn't turn his head back and quickly disappeared into the depths of the woods. After a long time, Chu Bailey had a complicated expression and muttered, "The genius of the great Joseong heroes list just died. Died at the hands of a 2 or 3-year-old child." The well-informed Chu Bailey fell into chaos, and his worldview was shattered into slag. Zhou Suanji's decisiveness and action sent chills down his spine. But more of a curiosity. Zhou Suanji didn't attack him, which shows that his nature is not bad. Pity. Can't you help me, you little brat? Chu Bailey fell into despair. If there were monsters in this area, then he would really be finished. After killing a cultivator in the inner core, Zhou Suanji and Xiao Jiangxiu continued to flee. For fear that another monk would come after him. The use of the red dragon sword this time made him mentally exhausted. He felt that his eyelids were hanging on the scales, and he would fall asleep at any time. After all, the other party was a cultivator in the inner core realm. He was completely focused, and wielding the sword at the fastest speed, which placed a heavy load on his mental power. Less than 2 miles ahead, Zhou Suanji almost fell, but fortunately, little Zhang Shui supported him in time. "Brother, are you all right? Should I carry you?" Little Zhang Shui asked with concern. Seeing Zhou Suanji's haggard appearance, she was very distressed. Zhou Suanji waved his hand and said, "It's fine, I'm fine." He seems to be 2 years old, but his soul is already mature. How can he let a 6-year-old girl carry him? He noticed that Xiao Jiangxiu's legs were shaking slightly, and she was obviously very tired. Continuing to walk for several hundred meters, Zhou Suanji couldn't hold on any longer, so he sat on the ground to rest. The demon cultivator was dead, and Chu Bailey was seriously injured. It is estimated that they will not be in danger for a while. He could only comfort himself like this. Fortunately, Chu Bailey did not come after him. After resting for a while, after recovering a little, they continued on their way. After half a month, the two finally stopped. They stood on the halfway of the mountain. The hillside above was very few trees, all stones and weeds. At the foot of the mountain was a small river, meandering like a snake, along the mountains and forests, leading to the end of the horizon. Zhou Suanji took the wooden house out of the Supreme Library and said with a smile, "Well, let's settle here." Little Jiangxiu jumped up in joy and almost fell, but fortunately Zhou Suanji caught her in time. Along the way, relying on the white crane sword intent and the red dragon sword, neither of them encountered any more danger, and sometimes they could hunt. Zhou Suanji's combat ability has also been honed, and it is not what it used to be. Little Jiangxiu began to clean up the house, while Zhou Suanji wandered around, making sure that little Jiangxiu was always in his sight. The hillside is as high as 100 meters. It is backed by the woods. From the top of the mountain, there are rolling hills in all directions, and there are no people in sight. Little Jiangxiu has neat hands and feet, and after finishing everything, she ran to the top of the mountain. With excitement on her face, she grabbed Zhou Suanji's hand and urged, "Brother, can you teach me swordsmanship?" It was Zhou Suanji who always protected her, which made her feel very guilty, so she also wanted to learn swordsmanship. "I didn't have a chance before, but now I have." Zhou Suanji smiled helplessly, and then took out a wooden sword from the supreme vault. This was a piece of wood he cut on the way, and it was reserved for little Zhang Shui. Sword Spirit has tested Xiao Jiangxiu's kendo talent, and it is very mediocre. However, in order to give Xiao Jiangxiu the power to protect herself, Zhou Suanji planned to pass on the White Crane swordsmanship to her. With little Zhang Shui's talent, it takes 10 years to learn the White Crane swordsmanship. Zhou Suanji was not worried, he was there to protect him anyway. Although Xiao Jiangxiu's kendo talent is not satisfactory, she is just like the little lord in life. With her around, Zhou Suanji can live very smoothly. Whenever he saw little Zhang Shui taking care of himself, he couldn't help but sigh. The world is really amazing. On Earth, a 6-year-old girl would be worried by her parents when she walked alone. Perhaps it has something to do with the spiritual energy. Little Zhang Shui behaves like a 10-year-old child. It was still early, and the two ate some dry food, so they kept practicing swords. One practice is 2 hours until dusk comes. Little Jiangxiu memorized 7 tricks, but the progress was not great, but it made her very excited. Before it was dark, the two entered the woods to pick up dry wood. After nightfall, they sat in front of the firewood and looked up at the stars. Little Zhang Shui held her cheeks in both hands, looked at the night sky, and said in confusion, "Brother, will we stay here forever?" Zhou Suanji nibbled at the roasted rabbit leg and replied, "Don't worry, give me 10 years, and I will take you back in 10 years. At that time, no one would dare to bully us. Every year he gets older, he can get a divine sword and draw a lottery. After 10 years, he will definitely leap in strength. His goal is not to survive, he also wants to go to the Great Zhou Palace for revenge." 10 years. Really? Little Jiangxiu asked obsessively. Night is always easy to awaken people's loneliness and confusion. Little Jiangxiu has been lonely since childhood and has a precocious mind, which is inevitable. Well, maybe it will take less than 10 years. Zhou Suanji nodded, and it was a pity to say it. There were quite a few treasures in the storage ring and storage bag left by the magic cultivator, but the exercises were all magic techniques. He also doesn't want to go crazy, so he hasn't officially entered the path of cultivation yet. When he is 3 years old, he hopes to draw a practice method. Seeing that Xiao Jiangxiu was in a low mood, Zhou Suanji began to tell her jokes to make her forget her worries quickly. Under the night, her silver bell-like laughter echoed. In this way, the two began to settle on this hillside. In order to commemorate this place, Zhou Suanji named it Jiandapo. The beasts in this area are very ferocious, and there are even monsters. Fortunately, the level is very low, just like the monks in the cultivation realm, they belong to the first stage of the cultivation path. The two practiced swords every day, and they hunted all over the mountains and fields, and the days were not boring. Time flies like this. During this period, a heavy rainstorm occurred, which directly washed down the wooden house and made Xiao Jiangxiu cry. Zhou Suanji used his body to protect her from the rain and took her to a cave to hide from the rain. Yuyuganshu.com also kept comforting her. From then on, Xiao Jiangxiu did not regard Zhou Suanji as her younger brother, but as her support. After the wooden house was washed away, Zhou Suanji built another one. Such torrential rain is rarely seen once in a few years, not to mention that this place is the most open. If it is in the woods, God knows how many poisonous insects and beasts will hide in the dark and give them a fatal blow. After half a year, it was just dawn, the sun slowly rose from the horizon, the sun swept across the continuous mountains and forests. Zhou Suanji and Xiao Jiangxiu practiced swords on the top of the mountain. Zhou Suanji mainly taught little Zhang Shui. After all, his White Crane swordsmanship was perfect, and he didn't need to practice anymore. It is detected that the sword master has reached the age of 3, and a random lottery starts. The voice of the sword spirit suddenly sounded in Zhou Suanji's mind. He shook his right hand and stopped immediately. Finally come. Day and night, I have been looking forward to it, and finally I have waited. What's wrong? Little Zhang Shui asked suspiciously, thinking that Zhou Suanji was not feeling well. Zhou Suanji waved his hand and said, "Go ahead, I'll think about how to teach you next." After speaking, he turned around. "Blessed by the Tathagata Buddha, you must be selected to practice the exercises." Zhou Suanji prayed in his heart, although the red dragon sword is strong, it is difficult to exert its true power without spiritual power. Ding! Congratulations to the sword master for winning the bronze cold wave sword, golden body art, and wild bull brute force pill. The voice of the sword spirit sounded again, causing Zhou Suanji to be stunned. He ignored the cold wave sword and the wild bull brute force pill, which were one level lower than the Along sword. His attention was focused on the golden body art. Hear the name. Wipe. Isn't this a physical cultivation method? He wants kendo skills. Although the golden body art is a method of refining the body, it can be upgraded to the sword energy golden body art. Sword masters can practice it. Some powerful swordsmen use their flesh to forge divine swords. Jianling explained that Zhou Suanji's resentment disappeared immediately and was replaced by expectation. It's almost there. Immediately, the cultivation method of the golden body art turned into a memory and flooded into his mind. The golden body art is divided into 4 layers in total: quenching the body with qi, reinforced iron bones, kirushing skeletons, and the immortality of the diamond. Although it is a method of physical cultivation, it can also cultivate with qi. Zhou Suanji was very satisfied. He turned his attention to the cold wave sword. As soon as his mind moved, the cold wave sword appeared in his hand, a chill penetrated into his palm, and he made his whole body tremble. Even little Zhang Xuet, who was practicing swordsmanship, suddenly felt a little cold. Zhou Suanji's body was blocking the hilt of the sword, she could only see the blade, and thought it was the red dragon sword, so she didn't feel relieved. The length and width of the blade of the cold wave sword and the Along sword are similar, but the blade is silver, exuding cold air, and the hilt is made of ice crystal, which is very ornate. Soon, a small line of 3 lines that only he could see appeared in front of him. Sword name, Cold Wave Sword Grade, Bronze Description, made in extremely cold places, it contains thousands of years of cold air. There was very little information, but the 1,000-year-old coldness made Zhou Suanji ponder. The bronze rank cold wave sword might not be as good as the silver rank Along sword, but with different attributes, it might be useful in battle. He took out the wild bull brutality pill and put it in a wooden bottle, 3 in total. The wild bull brute force pill is the ultimate pill. After taking it, you can obtain the wild bull's brute strength, but it also has great side effects. The current sword master should not use it, or he will lie down for a month. Jianling introduced. Zhou Suanji was shocked when he heard it. Wouldn't it be death to lie down for a month? Little Jiangxiu has no ability to protect him in the wilderness. Afterwards, he sat cross-legged in front of the cliff and began to practice the golden body art. He started breathing according to the method of breathing in the golden body. Heaven and earth have spiritual energy, which is the basis for all things to become stronger. According to the earth, it is some kind of energy. Basic breathing relies on the nose and mouth, while deep breathing is the pores of the whole body breathing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth together. It took him half a stick of incense before he felt the spiritual energy. The aura is hidden in the air. Unlike other gases, once inhaled, you will feel refreshed and the contrast is obvious. It takes half a stick of incense for the first intake of gas, which is equivalent to 15 minutes, which is definitely not slow. It takes days for mediocre people. Even last month, Zhou Gan, the genius 6th prince in the great Zhou royal family, spent half an hour. He was called a genius, and Emperor Zhou Yan was very happy. As he breathed out again and again, his understanding of the golden body art became higher and higher. After breathing out 100 times, he directly practiced the first layer of the golden body art to quench the body. At the same time, the cultivation realm has entered the first level of the qi-nourishing realm. Danshan has accumulated a lot of spiritual power. He was stunned for a while, then secretly said, cultivation is so easy. Your bloodline talent is very strong, your soul power is strong, and with the help of the Supreme Divine Sword System, this is naturally the case. Sword Spirit explained. Zhou Suanji blinked and asked, are the cultivation techniques and sword techniques the same? It's almost the same, but the practice has strict standards for the realm. For example, the second layer of the golden body art is reinforced with iron bones. You need to reach the fifth layer of the key nourishing realm to practice. Sword Spirit's answer made Zhou Suanji very satisfied. With his talent, it is not difficult to train to the fifth level of Qi Yang realm. What's more, the storage rings and storage bags of the 3 people he killed before contained a lot of spirit stones and spirit pills, which could help him cultivate. He didn't pass on the golden body art to little Zhang Shuet, but it wasn't because he was selfish. It's just that the golden body art can only take 2 paths, one is physical cultivation, and the other is sword cultivation. Physical cultivation is too hard, he can't bear little Zhang Shue's scars. If Jiangziu is concerned, this girl has no talent. There will definitely be other exercises in the future. After thinking about it, he decided to ask little Zhang Shuet. When Xiao Jiangxiu learned that she could practice cultivation, she was very excited. Even in Qinghe village, there were legends of monks. But knowing that the golden body needs to be tempered later, she immediately persuaded her. There are thousands of ways to quench the body, and the conclusion is to use external forces to quench the body, such as lightning, giant waves, mountains, etc. The process is extremely difficult. The higher the cultivation realm, the less the number of physical cultivation. The monk's first exercise is very important. It can lay a foundation and have an impact on the future. It is also a good thing for little Jiangxiu not to practice. Sister, don't be disappointed, I will help you find the right exercise for you in the future. Zhou Suanji comforted that he had only grown to the height of little Zhang Shue's belly, so the picture was a bit funny. Well, I believe you. Little Zhang Shue smiled sweetly, then picked up the wooden sword and continued to practice. At this point, Zhou Suanji officially embarked on the road of cultivation. Most of the time every day is focused on cultivation, occasionally mentioning Xiao Jiangxiu's swordsmanship. Little Jiangxiu is also very hardworking and not playful. Zhou Suanji didn't want to discourage her, so she never stopped her. Half a month later, Zhou Suanji broke through to the second floor of Qi Nourishing Realm. The Qi Nourishing state is divided into 10 layers, which is the first step in human cultivation, followed by foundation building, consecration, inner elixir, spiritual spring, nascent soul, out-of-body, spiritual refinement, and Mahayana. Empress de Zhou is an existence far beyond the inner core realm. For him, she has a long way to go. A month later, Zhou Suanji broke through to the third level of Qi Nourishing Realm. 3 months later, Zhou Suanji broke through to the fourth level of Qi Nourishing Realm. 5 months later, Zhou Suanji has broken through to the fifth level of Qi Nourishing Realm, and can cultivate the second level of the Golden Body Art. A 3-year-old cultivator of the fifth floor of the Qi Nourishing Realm, if it spreads out, he will definitely be beaten like a monster. At the same time, his physical strength has reached 3,000 catties. Thanks to those pills, he was able to cultivate so fast. At the same time, the Supreme Excalibur system was helping him nourish his muscles and bones all the time, otherwise he would not be able to withstand the impact of spiritual energy at the age of 3. Zhou Suanji did not practice the second level of the Golden Body Art. According to what Sword Spirit said, he was still too young. It is best to practice it after the age of 5, which would have a greater effect. Zhou Suanji was not eager for quick success and continued to take in his anger. With the use of spiritual power, the White Crane swordsmanship is extremely lethal. It can easily chop down a 20-centimeter tree at a distance of 5 meters. Ordinary wild boars can be fatally struck by one blow. This feeling of getting stronger fascinated Zhou Suanji. In front of the cliff on the top of the mountain, it has become a place for 2 children to practice. Today, noon. How is that possible? The 5th level of Qi nourishment. An exclamation came into Zhou Suanji's ears. He opened his eyes and looked, only to see Chu Bailey Yujian flying in the air, trembling all over, looking at him with disbelief. As soon as she saw him, little Zhang Shui became nervous and ran to Zhou Suanji's side. Zhou Suanji frowned and stood up slowly. Facing the cultivators in the inner core realm, they couldn't escape at all. The last time Zhou Bailey witnessed his sneak attack to kill Mo Zhu, he probably wouldn't take it lightly. Chu Bailey looked down at Zhou Suanji, and a storm surged in his heart. Since the injury recovered, he has been looking for Zhou Suanji everywhere. The emperor paid off, he finally found it. But a year ago, this kid obviously didn't have the slightest spiritual power. He reached the 5th level of Qi nourishing in just 1 year? And that sword, what happened? Changed one? What do you want to do? We are your saviors. Zhou Suanji held little Zhang Shui's hand and asked loudly. The tender voice resounded from under the clouds, pulling Chu Bailey's thoughts back to reality. He tried his best to squeeze out a smile and said, "Don't worry, I'm not a demon heresy, the one last time was a demon cultivator. I come from a prestigious school, the Tibetan sword sect, have you heard of it?" Zhou Suanji and little Zhang Shui stared at each other, confused. Chu Bailey shook his head and laughed, "Yes, how did the 2 children hear the name of the Tibetan sword sect?" He slowly descended and asked with a smile, "Which sect or family are you from? Do you need me to send you back?" He expected that Zhou Suanji had an extraordinary background and wanted to forge a good relationship. Zhou Suanji clenched the cold wave sword tightly and replied decisively, "No need. He has no intention of killing." The sword spirit reminded Zhou Suanji in a timely manner, and just now let Zhou Suanji breathe a sigh of relief. Facing the inner alchemy cultivator, he didn't think he could win. Chu Bailey stopped in the air and said helplessly, "Trust me, I really have no ill intentions. Do you think I look like a bad person? If I were a bad guy, I could attack you just now, but I didn't." Zhou Suanji took back the cold wave sword and said, "Okay, I trust you, but you can't touch us." Anyway, he couldn't beat him, so he just thought he was a good guy. Chu Bailey laughed when he saw it, landed on the cliff, waved at them, and said, "Come here, be careful not to fall." Zhou Suanji and the little Zhang Suijin girl are very lovable, making Chu Bailey have a good impression of them. However, Zhou Suanji made a ruthless attack last year, which made him secretly keep an eye on it. He didn't want to die at the hands of a 3-year-old. Zhou Suanji pretended to be vigilant and pulled little Zhang Shui around carefully, watching Chu Bailey burst into laughter. They had just started chatting when they came to the middle of the mountain. In order to reduce the vigilance of the 2 children, Chu Bailey first told about his origins. It turns out that the demon cultivator killed by Zhou Suanji was a genius of the Luo demon sect, Ye Fei. Ye Fei is ranked 92nd on the Great Zhou Hero list. The Heroes and Heroes ranking is a ranking of geniuses under the age of 100. Under the Great Zhou dynasty, there are so many monks, and they can be ranked 92nd under the age of 100, which shows how powerful they are. Zhou Bailey had a feud with Ye Fifan 10 years ago. At that time, Ye Fifan slaughtered a village, and Zhou Bailey drew his sword to help when he saw the injustice, causing this trouble. This time, Chu Bailey left the Tibetan sword sect and was about to go to a city under the Tibetan sword sect to recruit disciples, but he encountered Ye Fifan, and the 2 inevitably had a fierce battle. Chu Bailey lost to Ye Fifan, but he also hurt Ye Fifan, so he gave Zhou Suanji a chance to take advantage. Of course, the main reason for Zhou Suanji's success was his 2-year-old appearance. A generation of demon sect Tianjiao died at the hands of a 2-year-old child. Who would believe it if he told it? Speaking of which, Chu Bailey sighed, "I'm looking for you, just to repay my kindness. It's dangerous to see you all alone and wandering outside. Why don't I send you back, I don't want anything in return. He looked at Zhou Suanji with sincere eyes. The 3-year-old child in front of him was really amazing. He couldn't treat Zhou Suanji as a child. He even suspected that Zhou Suanji was taken away by an old senior, and his soul was very mature. However, he guessed half right. However, he has also heard some legends that there are prodigies in certain families with tyrannical blood, and very people can compare. Zhou Suanji waved his hand and said, "It's fine to send us home, just leave the cultivation technique, medicinal pills and magic weapon. It depends on your heart." He didn't say that he and Xiao Jiangxiu were helpless, lest Chu Bailey would have evil intentions. Upon hearing this, Chu Bailey took off a storage bag at his waist, took out 2 books, a dagger and 3 small white jade bottles, and placed them beside Zhou Suanji and Xiao Jiangshui. "There are 2 exercises here. You can pick one, and I can teach you. My injury has not yet healed, so I can accompany you for 2 years. After 2 years, I have to leave, and I can't delay any longer. You don't have to worry, really, if I have bad intentions towards you, there are hundreds of ways for you to be captured." Chu Bailey said solemnly again, sighing in his heart, "Why is this 3-year-old child so vigilant? Lack of love since childhood?" Little Zhang Shui held her fingers and asked timidly, "Grandpa, did you really lie to us? We are miserable. I have no parents since I was a child, my grandmother didn't want me, and Suanji's parents were also eaten by monsters. Don't lie to us." Zhou Suanji almost collapsed, "So you just revealed our origins? Fortunately, this is not his real origin." Hearing this, Chu Bailey showed a look of pity and love, and said, "Otherwise, you will recognize me as my grandfather, and I will take you back to the Tibetan sword sect, and you will be my grandsons and granddaughters in the future." Leaving aside his softness, Zhou Suanji's talent also moved his heart. But such talent can also cause trouble. When little Zhang Shui heard this, she asked in surprise, "Really?" Zhou Suanji rolled her eyes at her and said, "We won't go to Tibetan sword sect, we'll just stay here. If you go to the Tibetan sword sect, there are so many people with mixed eyes, what if it is exposed? Tibetan sword sect is still within the great Zhou dynasty." Little Zhang Shui obeyed him, nodded and said, "Wherever Suanji says to go, I'll go wherever." Since that heavy rain, she no longer calls Zhou Suanji her younger brother. Chu Bailey shook his head and laughed, "This little guy. Okay then, I'll accompany you for 2 years, what kind of exercises do you want to practice?" Chu Bailey compromised. Xiao Jiangxiu looked at Zhou Suanji, and after Zhou Suanji nodded, she picked up 2 books. I have to say that although Xiao Jiangxiu's grandmother was not responsible, she began to teach her how to read when she was 3 years old. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. The number of literate people in the village is less than 5 fingers, including little Zhang Shui. If it is placed on earth, literacy at the age of 3 is completely a child prodigy. Seeing the hesitant look on Xiao Jiangxiu's face, Chu Bailey said with a gentle smile, "You are a girl, just practice the Yangchun flying snow kung fu. If you practice it to the highest level, you can condense the inner elixir, your face will not age, and you will live 500 years. When Xiao Jiangxiu heard this, she nodded immediately, blinked her eyes and asked curiously, "What is Niadan?" Chu Bailey explained patiently, cultivating knowledge for little Zhang Shui. Zhou Suanji hadn't told her before, because she was afraid that she wouldn't understand it, and it would be useless to say it. It's better to practice the sword. After little Zhang Shui understood, Chu Bailey turned to Zhou Suanji and asked, "Do you practice another book?" Zhou Suanji had already read the exercise, it was not suitable for swordsmen, so he shook his head and said, "No need, I have a family practice." Chu Bailey nodded. After all, this child has already reached the 5th level of qi nourishment. At this point, Chu Bailey also stayed. Zhou Suanji did not allow Chu Bailey to live in the same house with them, but in desperation, Chu Bailey had to build a wooden house by himself. For the next month, Zhou Suanji kept on guard. Chu Bailey spent most of his time recovering from his injuries, and occasionally taught little Zhang Shui to practice. At first, he was also interested in the white crane swordsmanship practiced by Xiao Zhang Shui, but after reading it for a long time, he didn't see anything clear, because Xiao Zhang Shui's swordsmanship was really bad. Days are still the same. 3 months later. It was snowing heavily. Zhou Suanji broke through to the 6th level of the Qi-nourishing realm, and little Jiangxiu also officially stepped into the first layer of the Qi-nourishing realm. Chu Bailey was sitting on the top of the mountain, looking out at the horizon, and in the flying snow, the mountains were looming. What is that? He muttered to himself, his white eyebrows furrowed, and his face showed a look of vigilance. Just as Chu Bailey was looking at the horizon, little Zhang Shui's voice came from behind, "Grandpa, come here, I'm in trouble with my cultivation." Chu Bailey retracted his thoughts, got up and walked away. To this day, Xiao Jiangxiu has regarded him as his grandfather, and Zhou Suanji also recognizes him, and his relationship with him is considered close. Zhou Suanji was taking in his qi halfway up the mountain, keeping a distance from Chu Bailey. Just because Chu Bailey's cultivation was too high, he couldn't win the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It will be 4 years old soon. Zhou Suanji longed in his heart. He once took out the cold wave sword and practiced swordsmanship. After watching it for a while, Chu Bailey's face changed drastically. He pulled him, and said earnestly, "Suanji, before the crisis of life and death, don't take out the 2 swords of, otherwise it will cause endless trouble." Just the bronze-level cold wave sword made Chu Bailey's complexion change drastically. Zhou Suanji is now looking forward to the golden, amethyst, and Jinyalevel divine swords. Time continues to fly by. In a blink of an eye, another 3 months passed. It is detected that the sword master has reached the age of 4, and a random lottery starts. Ding! Congratulations to the sword master for winning the silver bloody sword, 8 sword steps, and 100 tier 3 spirit stones. Hearing the sound of the sword spirit, Zhou Suanji was secretly surprised. Another silver sword. His mind moved, and the information of the bloody sword appeared in front of him. Sword name, bloody sword grade, silver description, the bloodthirsty sword, the more blood it absorbs, the stronger the evil spirit. A blood-sucking sword? This is the magic sword? Zhou Suanji was even more delighted. The attributes of the sword were different, and the effect was better when facing different enemies. As for the 3rd-level spirit stone, he naturally knew it. Spirit stones are the common currency in the practice world, and can also be used for cultivation. From low to high, they are divided into 1 to 9 levels. Each level is 10 times different. 2nd-level spirit stones are equivalent to 10 first-level spirit stones. Analogy: he is equivalent to directly getting 10,000 first-level spirit stones. In addition, there are a lot of spirit stones in his supreme library, 2 minions from Yefifan and Fang family Shenhua. What is the 8 swords steps? Swordsmanship or equipment? Zhou Suanji asked curiously, and then a memory entered his mind. The 8 sword steps is a type of footwork, driven by sword energy. 1 step can reach up to 100 meters, and within 8 steps, it will kill all enemies. Of course, it's just an exaggeration. After he merged the memory of the 8 sword steps, he immediately began to practice. The footwork of the 8 sword steps is extremely strange, and Zhou Suanji fell a dog to eat just the first move. Chu Bailey on the top of the mountain opened his eyes and looked at Zhou Suanji's awkward movements, with a curious look on his face. What is this little brat doing? It took a whole stick of incense before Zhou Suanji completed the swordsmanship of the 8 swords steps. He continued to practice, occasionally tripping, falling, and then getting up again. At the end of the day, he barely practiced 18 times, and at night, he still persevered. By the early morning of the next day, Zhou Suanji had practiced 50 times, and the more he went on, the easier he practiced. After practicing 100 times, his 8 sword steps only reached the point of small success. The difficulty of practice is obviously higher than that of white crane swordsmanship. The next day, he continued to practice with undiminished enthusiasm. After practicing 500 times that day, the 8 sword steps directly reached consummation. Seeing Zhou Suanji constantly moving around halfway up the mountain, like a teleportation, Chu Bailey was stunned. At first, he thought that Zhou Suanji was practicing blindly, but he didn't expect to actually develop his skills. He quickly grabbed Zhou Suanji and asked, "What kind of footwork are you using?" Zhou Suanji said calmly, 8 sword steps. At the age of 4, he pretended to be mature and looked very funny. 8 sword steps. Chu Bailey muttered to himself, as if caught in a demonic barrier. Zhou Suanji broke free from his hand and continued to perform the 8 sword steps. With his current cultivation, he can move up to 10 meters in one step, and after 8 steps, his spiritual power will be exhausted. Without spiritual power, the 8 sword steps can only be ordinary footwork, and there is no maneuvering effect. Chu Bailey looked at him with a complicated expression, only to feel a pain in his liver. This kid is so enchanting. Could it be the reincarnation of an immortal god? This kind of talent may be able to impact the supreme throne of the 9 sword emperors in the future. Although Chu Bailey was curious, he was not greedy, instead he wanted to accept Zhou Suanji as his disciple. After learning the 8 sword steps, Zhou Suanji's strength leaped. In order to hone his fighting skills, he began to learn from Chu Bailey. When he saw Zhou Suanji's white crane sword intent, Chu Bailey almost turned into petrified. It was the first time he saw Zhou Suanji use the white crane sword intent. At the age of 4, he was proficient in sword intent, and there was no such existence in the history of their Tibetan sword sect. Throughout the great Zhou dynasty, he had never heard of it. After that, Chu Bailey had greater expectations for Zhou Suanji, and he would instill in Zhou Suanji the concept of justice every day. He would draw a sword to help him, cut down demons and exorcise demons, and hear Zhou Suanji's ears grow calluses. Half-year later, Zhou Suanji broke through to the 8th level of Qi-nourishing realm, and he consumed all his 3rd-level spiritual stones before he could break through 2 small levels in a row. Chu Bailey was completely convinced. Little Jiangxiu reached the 3rd level of Qi-nourishing, thanks to Chu Bailey's guidance. Zhou Suanji did not distribute the 3rd-level spirit stone to Xiao Jiangxiu because Chu Bailey was not allowed. He claimed that little Zhang Shui's body could not bear the 3rd-level spirit stone at all. This day, Chu Bailey called Zhou Suanji and Xiao Jiangxiu together. He sighed, "I have to leave for a while. I wanted to stay for another year, but my fellow disciples are in trouble, I have to solve it." Zhou Suanji pondered, "A night eagle flew over last night, could it be a letter from the Tibetan sword sect?" Little Zhang Shui nodded and said, "Grandpa, remember to come back and see us." Chu Bailey rubbed her head and smiled kindly, "Don't worry, I'll be back when I'm done." With regret and worry in his eyes, he turned to look at Zhou Suanji. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com continued, "Suanji, take good care of your sister, understand, you both depend on each other, and neither can abandon the other." Before Zhou Suanji could speak, little Zhang Shui put his arms around his neck and giggled, "Suanji is my best relative, so he won't leave me." She is full of confidence in Zhou Suanji. Now if she is asked to choose between Zhou Suanji and her grandmother, she will definitely choose Zhou Suanji. Chu Bailey smiled, turned around Yu Jian and flew, turning into a rainbow light, and soon disappeared into the sky. For some reason, Zhou Suanji always felt that he might never return. Because his eyes are the same as the Empress Zhao Xian who left him. Zhou Suanji didn't stop him. One was that he was incapable, and the other was that he couldn't. He sighed, and then continued to practice with little Zhang Shui. Zhou Suanji's goal is to reach the foundation establishment realm at the age of 6. The days are still the same, and the two people's activities have been kept within a radius of 5 miles. Behind Jiandi slope is a forest, where they can catch hares, wild boars and other prey. And in front of Jiandi slope is a river, where you can fish. 2 months later, there was a sudden, earth-shattering roar from the north, and Zhou Suanji opened his eyes in fright. Little Zhang Xuet, who was practicing the exercises beside him, stood up and hid behind Zhou Suanji, thinking that a monster was attacking. Zhou Suanji frowned. He sat on the top of the mountain and could look out to the north. It was the first time he heard such a ferocious roar, which was deafening. Suanji, should we live in another place? Little Zhang Xuet asked cautiously. She was still much taller than Zhou Suanji at the age of 8. Since she started training, her skin has become whiter and tenderer, and with her delicate face, she looks like a little fairy.